Hello.
Hello, Richard.
Hello,
Uh,
Sao Paulo. I wish I was there. It's probably warmer there than it is here.
it is warm. It has been raining a lot, but let me give an introduction in plain Portuguese. Boa tarde, pessoal. Boa tarde, pessoal do Games for Change. Meu nome é Paulo Hartmann. Eu estou aqui com o Richard Barbrook. O Richard Barbrook é uma figura bastante interessante, especialmente se a gente pensar em relação ao pensamento crítico, algo que está em bastante desuso hoje em dia aqui no Brasil, infelizmente, né? Ou critical thinking, né? O Richard, além de ser um grande pensador dessa área, ele também desenvolveu um game que chama Class Wargames, e que ele, melhor do que ninguém, vai poder falar. Um ponto importante, o Richard Brown, durante o nessa época, a gente tinha o Gilberto Gil como ministro da Cultura, né? E o Brasil despontava como um dos países mais inovadores em relação à cultura digital, servindo como modelo para vários outros países, né, em relação a como abordar a questão da cultura digital, do open source e por aí vai. Sem mais delongas, com vocês, Richard Barbrook.
Hello again. Hi. Right. You're going to ask me a question, Paolo? I've disappeared. Okay, so I'm Richard Barbrook. I work at the University of Westminster. I'm a founder member of Class Wargames. I also co-wrote a very famous pamphlet in 1995 about the internet in its early stages, the Californian ideology, and a book called Imaginary Futures, which also came out in Portuguese. I guess the main project you want me to talk about today is Class Wargames. This was set up 13 years ago, and it was based around basically exploring Guy Debord's The Game of War. It's here. I will just show you. There are. Look, there it is. So Guy Debord was the founder of the Situationist International, obviously wrote The Society of the Spectacle in 1967, which is seen as the manifesto of the May 68 French Revolution. And in retirement, he made this game, which he actually claimed was the most important achievement of his life. So I wrote this book, Imaginary Futures, essentially about the ideas of Marshall McLuhan. And when I got to the end of that, I thought, right, I'd really like to write a book about Debord. And when thinking about this, the problem is I have lots of books about Guy Debord, but they're like what Debord said, they have a corpse in their mouth. I mean, they're very good, but they're very much, either academic or very reverential. And they're thinking about writing. They're not sort of like situationist in their own way. So I thought when I discovered at the back of one of these books the rules of this game, we started playing it among a group of friends of ours, and I realized this was a really good way into actually being able to write about situationism in a new way, rather than just making, as I said, just like a history of them or like something dead. So this book, and there's a really good film which is like a primer to the game, which is available from the Class Wargames website, classwargames.net. It actually shows you what he's trying to do in the game. This setup here is actually a game played in first time in the Federal University in Rio de Janeiro between Jar Jar and Tiago. It was a really exciting game right to the last moment. Both sides were going to win, and then suddenly somebody made a move and won. And literally the other person could have won if they'd had one more move. And this showed you, and other experiences of playing this game, that he actually spent a lot of time on it. I mean, as a teenager, I developed games, as lots of people did, board games. And I know that the difficulty is always balancing the game. You can get an original idea, you can make a prototype, but the difficulty is actually getting it to a stage where you can play it for like an hour and a half, and it's not obviously tipped to one person or the other. So he and his partner, Alice Bellico, obviously spent an awful lot of time working out how to make the game work. We had to do a bit of tweaks with like the initial layout to stop people being too defensive in the game. This particular version, which is in the book, the Rio de Janeiro layout, particularly encourages that. But otherwise, it's a really fun game. And I think this is quite surprising, because if you look at someone like Bertil Ohlmann, he's an American academic. He wrote a really good book on Karl Marx's theory of alienation, and he invented a game called Class Struggle, which is a sort of thing that people bought for each other at Christmas and played once and never played again, because it's actually a crap game. That's the problem with it. It's a great idea. It's like what's called a goose game. You go round in a circle and you pick up cards and all this. So it's a bit like Monopoly or something like that. But it's actually not a very good game. Once you've played it once or twice, you can't play it again. The thing about this game, we've been now playing it, I said, for over 10 years, and it's still good. And it's particularly what we did with this game is that De Boer originally invented it as a one-on-one game. So it was like chess or drafts or Wei Chi Go or something like that. But he thought it was going to be played in sort of, workers' bars and, bohemian, clubs or something. Actually, we realized if you made a bigger version of it, it's more fun because you can play it as a team game. And then it's even better if you actually get newbies to play it. So what we do, we sort of got this quite down pat where you just go there, you show the film, explain the rules, divide the audience into two teams and get them to play. And again, it's interesting because usually, some people just play a few moves, but often you'll get people who'll stick to the very end. We played it once in Rotterdam, and this guy kept being phoned up by his partner. And he kept saying, no, I'll come in a few minutes. I'm just finishing. And eventually she turned up at the at the event as he was about to win the game, fortunately. Otherwise, he really would have had a hard time. So it's immersive. So the question is, why did he invent this? And this is one thing that interested us. We discovered from talking to Michel Bernstein, who was his partner in the late 50s, early 1960s, that he was always into games. He said she used to buy him toy soldiers for his birthday. Boys will be boys, as she wonderfully put it. But in this game, he was trying to do something else. And I thought what I found interesting doing the research into the book was that he saw it as a training game. So, there's a long tradition, obviously, in the military and in business and in government of using games, particularly role-playing exercises, to work out what you people would do to train for situations. Obviously, the military use games because you can't really fight a war to train people because people get killed and wounded. So you have to actually train them with games of some kind. I mean, obviously now with computer games, but also board games are actually very effective in doing this as well. So De Boer wanted to copy that. A lot of, the sort of hobbyist games of the 1950s and 60s, the sort of games he was playing from America, actually came out of the US military. So a lot of them, for instance, you'll find a lot of board games in that period, and they still do, use hex maps. This was developed by the RAND Corporation, the same people who helped to invent the internet. So this interested us. He was taking this idea of using games for fun, but also for education. And so the question was, what is he trying to educate her? Now he's on the revolutionary left, and one of the key things that he was trying to avoid, and I think this is partly, as I said, this aversion I have to some of the books I have about situationism, even though I appreciate them, is that they turn it into a sort of fetish object, basically. I mean, situationism, interestingly, particularly seems to lend itself to this for some reason. I guess because it's partly an artistic movement as well as a political movement. But he was trying to do something different. The Situation Side International was wound up in the early 1970s to stop people turning it into a dead ideology. And so the game itself, in a sense, is a response to that. He wants to teach people the principles of revolutionary action. I mean, in May 68, the left was beaten by a General de Gaulle. So essentially what he wants to do is teach the people the skills of generalship. So what's interesting about this game is it's not a game of May 68. So you would think, especially our experience over the last, 40 odd years since this game was developed, you would have a game of, riots, occupations, demonstrations or something like that. Or given the period in which he was interested in games, sort of 1950s, 60s, early 70s, it would be a game of, guerrilla warfare. Vietnam, Algeria, these sorts of places against an imperialist enemy. I mean, I certainly have games which recreate this. You can be the Vietnamese and beat the American imperialists. All very good fun. Or again, obviously the iconic event of the 20th century was the Russian Revolution. And again, it's not a Russian Revolution game, and there are plenty of those around as well. So what it is, it's a Napoleonic game. So the pieces on it, for instance, they're obviously stylized. If you look at this, it's very much based on a Marcel Duchamp chess set, very abstract. It's got the pieces. Look, these pieces are the infantry, these are the cavalry, and these are the artillery. And interesting, we originally did it with toy soldiers, but then we discovered that this is the actual design he used. And you have forts, mountains, arsenals. The purpose of the game is the two sides like a network, which are connected to the arsenals. And the idea is to basically break the other side's network and knock out their arsenals. So it's interesting, if you think about it in the 20th century, how he's anticipating the world that we live in the 21st century, where it's like networks versus networks. I mean, at the moment we have, the Chinese network versus the American network, 5G versus 4G. So in a sense, what he's doing here is, in a very abstract way, thinking about, as a situationist, not just Napoleonic warfare, but also the coming cybernetic society that we live in today. So what he was also involved in at the time was a publishing house called Champ Libre, which published lots of left-wing, particularly obviously ultra-left publications about council communism, people like Bordiger and so on, and also Foucault's publications against prisons and things like this. But also it published military theory. So it was very unusual for a left publication publishing house to talk about military history and military theory. And in particular, he republished both the military histories of Karl Clausewitz, the campaign histories, which are really good. If you ever want to read a good piece of military history, it's like Clausewitz, his analysis of Bonaparte's invasion of Russia in 1812, because he was on the other side. He was actually with the Russians defending themselves against the dictator's invasion. So that, again, they're very interesting. And also he commissioned a new French translation of Clausewitz's classic book on war. And what this game does is teach you some basic Clausewitzian theory, like concentration of forces, outflanking the enemy, psyching your opponent. When you've got an advantage, keep on attacking and, chase them to the air. So it's basically trying to create some basic ideas of how you should combine strategy and tactics to win. So instead of sort of setting up a political party with an ideology, which is the sort of classic 20th century solution to the radical left, Trotskyists, Maoists, Stalinists, Social Democrats, they all do the same thing. And then, they have a party line and you propagate it out. What he wanted to do is teach people to be their own general. Friedrich Engels jokingly said that the French were a nation of generals, which is why they had difficulty self-organizing themselves, because nobody wanted to be a private. And Guy Debord ran with that idea. He said, well, if we're a nation of generals, let us learn how to be generals. And so it teaches you these basic military skills, which obviously, because war is a continuation of politics by other means, or politics is a continuation of war by other means, you can then apply to your actual everyday life as a politico. And so that's what we were interested in doing. As I said, it was a surprise that this game was good. I mean, our expectation when we started playing it, since it was developed by a philosopher. Though of course, De Boer famously told Giorgio Agamben he wasn't a philosopher, he was a strategist. And that's how we realised it's a good game, because it's not a artistic experiment, which is then looks like a game. It's interesting. There's lots of, as I said, with this class struggle board game, or lots of games, artistic experiments in the last 20 years, flash games and so on, which are trying to be political, but they actually don't work very well as a game. It's interesting, in the last few years there have been a few good ones coming out. I mean, we played a very good game recently called Block by Block, I think it's called, where it's basically like an urban insurrection game. It's an American game. And that shows that now there's another new generation of people who come up who are gamers first, and then put the politics on top of the game and the political message they want to. And in a sense, De Boers is a pioneering example of that. The politics and the theory are here and are really important, but the game itself is what makes it work. And he realizes that a game is a game is a game, first and foremost. And it's like a film or a book or any other creative act. It actually has to work in its own right before it can work for its political purposes. And just because something is woke or politically correct or whatever, it doesn't matter. If it doesn't work as a game, or it doesn't work as a film or a creative act of any kind, it doesn't work. As simple as that. So in that sense, the message is not the medium. The medium has to be respected in its own right. And so I think that's the way. It's a pioneer of a lot of the games that are now coming out in the last few years. Board games, obviously they're easier to produce, but increasingly also people trying to experiment with video games. You can do that. Okay, so out of this, we started to play other games. I have a whole cupboard next door of political games of various kinds. We hacked a couple of other games. For instance, we were invited by a group called Voina to come to the Cyberfest in St. Petersburg in 2008. It was actually in the Winter Palace, just the Hermitage, basically. Museum, and for those of you who've seen Sergei, the Sergei Eisenstein October film, it's the bit at the end. It was actually the bit at the end where they're running into the Winter Palace and they go up these spiral staircase, and we were actually at the top of the spiral staircase. So we played the Boers game, and we also did a toy soldier game of the Russian Civil War. So we took a set of rules about that period, early 20th century, 1910s, 1920s, I think the First World War Civil, and used and created a particular scenario for the Russian Civil War. In other times, we did a game based on this painting by a friend of ours, comrade of ours, Kamaldi Donker, which is of a particular battle from the Haitian Revolution. Called for the Battle of Fort Bederet. We did some research, and then we used a particular game called Command and Colors Napoleonics, and made our own version of it and scenario for it, and played that to illustrate some of the ideas in the game about bringing De Boer's idea and showing how you could use other games as teaching tools. So that's our board game. We then started to apply it in other ways. Though I'm of the punk rock generation, so I discovered Guy Debord from being told about it in a Sex Pistols concert in 1976 in the 100 Club, and then going off and buying The Poverty of Student Life in a Camden left-wing bookshop, and thinking, oh, this is so much better than the other left-wing stuff that we've been taught at university. And it was like our esoteric knowledge. But since then, I certainly by the advent of neoliberalism in Britain and Thatcher and all the rest of it, I became part of the Labour left. I've been in the Labour Party since 1980. That's my 40th year now, which is quite a weird idea. I was very involved in the hard left, who ran London in the 1980s, and friends of mine became the Labour leadership between 2015 and 2019. And so we were asked to help out in the 2017 British general election. And one of the things we did was make a app game for the election called Corbyn Run. And that was an interesting experience. So we took some of the ideas based on this game and the other political games we've been playing, and thought, how do we do this? There was a game made for Jean-Luc Mélenchon's presidential election campaign in France called Fiscal Combat, where they had a similar idea. It was a computer game, and of course, because it's Fiscal Combat, i.e. Mortal Kombat, it was quite violent. So what we did was actually try and find another way of having a game. Sorry, I will show you this game, which we got rid of that particular idea. We made something that was entertaining and non-combative. Right, here we are, Corbyn Run. There we go. Takes a bit of time to load, as these things always do. Here we are. Look, you can still download it from both app stores, and it's basically a race game. So basically a race game where the character of Corbyn chases bankers and Tories, shakes them down for their money, and then in turn, as the Corbyn character collects more money, he can then release various pledges from the manifesto. And people who are interested in these particular issues join the campaign. So it's not like centred on an individual, though obviously he's the leader of the Labour Party. It's seen as a movement. The Corbyn was a movement to try and change the country. And much to our delight, this game took off. I would say it went viral, but I don't think we're allowed to say that in the current year of the pandemic. So we got well over 1 million hits in a very short space of time, got massive press coverage, both in this country and abroad. And it showed actually how you could use games to basically tell a political message. I mean, there were lots of very inventive ways during that campaign to do that. Using videos and using Facebook and memes and all the rest of it. But this was a particularly interesting way. And it was a way of communicating to an audience that wouldn't necessarily, watch the news, because the mainstream media news, as in most countries, is not only boring, but incredibly biased. And so it's a way of communicating ideas about, Labour's policies in a good and fun way. And the key thing is that the game was great to play. So my son was then 4, and it was one of his favourite games, not just because Daddy had helped make it, but also because it was really great to make. And there's a famous quotation when they were inventing the graphical user interface back in the late 1950s and early 1960s, that a good computer interface was one that could be used by admirals, generals, and 4-year-olds. And so we thought we'd actually put that into into practice by actually creating a game which a 4-year-old could play and enjoy. And I think that's something we learned from Guy Debord as well, that the game itself, the game is like, as it is, it's like a 16-bit homage of a race game, basically, a chase game. But what it does is, as I said, you can just play it and enjoy it. But of course, what it's also telling you is about Labour policy, but also that Labour policies aren't just the politicians. It's actually the people who make the politicians' policies, that actually they're what is empowering the campaign. We tried it again in 2019, though, with less success, because the game was released rather late because basically there was a quick election. So unfortunately it didn't take off in quite the same way. And nor did we have time to actually develop alternative games. As I said, we've also made other games. We've been making especially role-playing exercises. So we've done a series of role-playing exercises recently. We did last year, before the pandemic, we did one recreating the disputes within the British Parliament last year over how to resolve the Brexit dilemma. I think the resolving it is abandoning it. The crazy idea of seceding from the European Union, but it was just like it was a way of teaching people. Initially, it was commissioned by a foundation, Erste Foundation in Vienna, Austria. So they just wanted to understand the crazy nature of British politics, and we've also played it with constituency Labour parties over here. And also we did another game which was more to teach local activists about how to deal with things like developing a new region. So we had like an impoverished part of a city, and it recreated the disputes between different factions of the Labour Party and the different bits of the local community on how they should regenerate a local area without it falling to just gentrification and property speculation. And again, in both of these cases, what we were interested in doing is actually getting people to play against type. So one of the things that the board did in this is, as I said, this is came from Carl von Clausewitz's On War, and it's about Napoleonic warfare. So one of the things he was trying to do was saying, well, if you're going to beat Bonaparte or General de Gaulle in the case of May 68 revolution, you have to be able to play like Bonaparte. If you don't want to become a little Lenin, Trotsky, or Stalin, you have to be able to play better than them. So you should play it. So by playing at Bonaparte or playing at Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, Mao, Che, or whoever, you then don't have the temptation to fall into that sort of political trap. You empower everybody with those skills, but also because it's playing against type. And one of the interesting things you do role-playing exercises is to get people to play against type. So we did a few years ago a game about a general election here in 2010. We had a general election where a coalition government had to be formed. So it was either going to be Labour Party or Conservative Party forming a general election, forming the government after the general election. And they had to negotiate with the factions inside their party and the other smaller parties. And people found it interesting. So if they're on the Labour left, it was either to play the right wing of the Labour Party or play the Conservative Party. In fact, we have a friend of ours, a comrade from West London, who was so good as the Conservative Party leader. I said I was very, very glad he was in our party and not the opposition, because he won the game, because he was just so good at pretending to be a Tory. And he understood their mentality. And I think one of these things games can allow you to do is to explore how your enemy thinks. And by doing that, it's not just to acquire skills to beat them, but also to actually then be able to understand actually what motivates them. So again, this is not really role playing because it's a war game, but we have played with games which have done that. And I think that's, again, is an interesting way of thinking about games. Is one of the key things of games is particularly board games. I think is just getting a group of people around a table, and as Guy Debord would say, you always have to drink lots of wine for him. Or whatever your other poisons are. Enjoy, it's a social event. And even online, obviously during the pandemic, people have been playing a lot online as well. It's a social event, grouping people together, having fun, chatting and so on and so forth. Often, when we've been playing these public events, a lot of the good things, people have had the discussions around the table about what's he trying to do, isn't it fun, what's the shortcomings of both the politics and the game and all the rest of it, and the positive lessons you get. So there's that social element of it. But also, I think the other thing is to getting us, as I said, to think about politics in a different way. And that's that allow you to explore different ideas. And so role-playing exercises, I think, are particularly interesting in that aspect, because you can play against type. And so we played this game down at Labour Party conference about regenerating a local area. And again, people were playing things like, people who were on the hard left were playing Blairites, that is the right wing of the Labour Party, or playing, local the Tory property developer and that sort of thing. And they found that very useful, because if they then go off as working with councils or being councillors as a local area, how do you tackle that? And they become like training exercises to actually think about that. So I think that's, if you think about the politics of games, it's all in those different levels. As I said, there's a sort of sociability politics. It's a way of creating solidarity. Because often political meetings are really boring. They can be just another form of bureaucracy, and obviously, there's political movements since at least Robert Michel's political party has pointed out. One of the key things about political parties is often small groups try to take them over, and one of the ways they do that is boring the rest of the membership into submission. And games can be a really good way of actually making politics interesting. So that's whole sociability side of it, I think, is really important, about engaging with ideas, being able to explore ideas in a safe way, to actually understand your opponents better. And that's the other side of it, is making us more skilled. I mean, I'm unashamedly on the left, as I said, since I was a punk rocker in the 1970s, and now as a Labour activist. And so one of the things encouraging about games is to actually think, well, if you are going to be faced with governments like the ones you have or the ones we have, is we have to be smarter. We have to be able to beat them at the ballot box, but also when you're in power, how to actually be able to exercise it in such a way that you don't fall into the usual traps. And so games, I think, can work at all sorts of levels, making us feel more solidarity between each other, also learning how to be better politicos, and actually being able to then transform society. Because the point is to take the lessons of the game board or the game on the screen and then apply it in real life, and to create a better world, and eventually to make a truly human civilization. Thank you.
Excellent, Richard. Thank you very much for all your explanations. I guess definitely games probably the best methodology in order to deliver critical thinking and any kind of movement, if I may say so. Thank you very much. Let me just ask if there are questions.
I'd be very happy to answer questions.
Ok. Let me just bring forth. Temos questões no YouTube? Alguma pergunta?
I can say that if anyone's interested in Brazil in playing the game of war, Media Tactica Brazil have a copy of the pieces. And you can download the game board and print it out from our website. I think someone called Jar Jar has the pieces, actually, who played the Rio game. So I would contact Media Tactica Brazil, get the physical analog copy, and have a look at it. You can say, and also on the website, there's the rules. There's our video. There's some other games on there. You can also get a PDF of the book for free. That, of course, I'd prefer it if you bought the hard copy, because it looks really nice.
Yeah, for sure.
And as I said, it does have a homage to my visit to Brazil in it.
Okay.
I was promoting this. I think I was promoting this book, actually.
Yes, Imaginary Futures. Am I right?
Yeah. But it was good. It was really. I said it was interesting playing it in. It's always interesting playing it in different countries, what people get out of it. That was great, because when we were in the Federal University in Rio, they obviously have this wonderful outdoor space where they have, unlike in English universities, where they always have corporate catering. They had like these little family catering places, and they were great with a bar and everything. So it was like, and it was a very warm December or whatever it was evening. So it was a very idyllic way of playing the game, I thought.
Let me just check. No, we don't have any questions. So in order not to spoil the schedule, which is already running
on Brazilian time.
Yes. In Brazilian time, it's not summer time. it's kind of crazy,
Well,
but
it's the summer. They're used to it.
yeah. Okay.
I should have worn my green shirt that I got in Peeper. I wore my
Ah,
green tropical shirt I got in Peeper, which I wear. We have a carnival here at the end of August, so I like wearing it for carnival.
okay, fantastic. Okay,
Well, lovely. So,
thank you very much.
one of my favourite countries in the whole world.
Oh, thank you.
And I hope to come back when you're liberated.
For sure. There's we need critical thinking down here, you know. So
We look forward to you coming up here when it's safe to hold an aeroplane.
Yeah. Once we are able to travel again, we'll meet for sure.
Right,
Richard,
okay.
thank you very much. Thank you for all the details. See you soon.
And send me the edited when you. I'd edit out the right at the beginning when I didn't realise we were going to start.
Yeah. Okay. I'll send you. No problem. Thank you very much.
If you take out the first minute, then. Right. Okay. So where does this go?